My friends, let's talk about breakthrough. Not the fireworks, not the big Instagram post, but the moment you finally see clearly. That moment when you stop repeating old cycles, when your heart and your head finally get on the same team. A relationship breakthrough doesn't begin with your partner. It begins with you. When people think of relationship breakthroughs, they often imagine something external, a dramatic conversation, an apology, a sudden moment where the other person changes. But in truth, the most important and long-lasting breakthroughs happen internally. They're not loud, they're not flashy, they often happen in quiet moments after a long walk alone, a sleepless night, or a brutally honest question you finally ask yourself. That's the truth of it. The breakthrough begins with you. The quality of your relationships is a direct reflection of your relationship with yourself. When you don't trust your voice, you tend to stay silent. When you don't believe you're enough, you overextend. When you lack clarity on what you want, you accept whatever shows up. So before anything can shift on the outside, you need to shift how you see yourself. This is where self-awareness becomes a game changer. Self-awareness is not just recognizing what you're feeling. It's understanding why you're drawn to certain people, why you stay too long, or why you keep choosing what hurts. It's asking, what part of me thinks this is love? And what do I believe I deserve right now? Sometimes we hold on to someone not because they're the right person, but because we're afraid there might not be someone else. That fear doesn't come from reality. It comes from a belief we've absorbed, usually unconsciously. And if that belief goes unchecked, it'll run your relationship decisions on autopilot. That's why emotional confidence is so essential. When you trust that you can handle being alone, when you trust that your worth isn't defined by someone staying, everything shifts. You stop clinging, you stop chasing, you start choosing from a place of strength, not scarcity. But confidence doesn't come from pretending you don't care. It comes from doing the internal work, healing the insecurities, rewriting the stories you've been telling yourself, and building a stronger sense of identity. When you know who you are, you stop shrinking to fit someone else's version of you. And it doesn't end with awareness. You need boundaries too. A boundary is not a wall, it's not a punishment, it's a standard. It's saying, this is how I treat myself, and I expect to be treated the same way. Most people are never taught how to set boundaries in relationships. We're taught to be agreeable, to be liked, to avoid tension. But here's the truth. If you're not willing to risk discomfort, you're not ready for a real relationship. Because real love requires honesty. It requires courage. It requires you to speak up for yourself, even when your voice shakes. Sometimes your breakthrough is realizing that love should feel safe, not anxious. Sometimes it's recognizing that attraction alone isn't enough. And sometimes it's understanding that the connection you want starts with the connection you have with yourself. The breakthrough begins with you. When you stop waiting for someone to validate your worth, when you stop blaming others for how you feel, when you take full ownership of your needs, your patterns, and your growth, that's when everything changes. You start attracting people who match your energy, not your wounds. You start seeing red flags as information, not challenges to overcome. You stop falling for potential and start honoring reality. This shift isn't easy. It takes honesty, discipline, and sometimes grief. Grieving the old version of you who settled, who chased, who didn't know better. But that grief is a sign of growth. It means you're letting go of who you had to be in order to become who you truly are. And that's the beginning of everything. The beginning of healthier relationships, deeper connections, and real peace. So if you're looking for a breakthrough, don't look for it in their behavior. Don't wait for a text, a change of heart, or a better version of them. Look in the mirror. Because when you get clear on what you want, grounded in who you are, and unshakable in what you deserve, that's not just a breakthrough, that's freedom. One of the most powerful relationship breakthroughs you'll ever have is realizing that it's not about them, it's about the pattern. We spend so much time analyzing people, what they did, why they did it, whether they meant it, whether they'll change. But the real insight, the thing that shifts everything, comes when you zoom out. When you stop asking, why did they hurt me? And start asking, why do I keep finding myself in the same kind of hurt? It's not the specific person causing the pain. It's the pattern you're caught in. Patterns are like emotional loops. They repeat until they're addressed, and they're often rooted in something much earlier than the current relationship. Sometimes it's childhood. Sometimes it's a past relationship that left a deep impression. Sometimes it's just learned behavior we've never questioned. You can spot a pattern when the emotional experience repeats, even though the faces change. Maybe it's always you overgiving and them undercommitting. Or maybe you always feel like you're chasing clarity, unsure where you stand. Or you constantly fall for people who are unavailable in some form, emotionally, geographically, or even logistically. These aren't accidents, they're emotional habits, and they feel familiar, not because they're good for us, but because they mirror an old experience our brain has normalized. This is where awareness becomes a superpower. It's easy to blame others, to see each failed connection as bad luck or bad timing, but growth begins when you start to see your own role in the cycle, not to shame yourself, but to empower yourself. Because the moment you realize this keeps happening is the same moment you get to say, and I'm done letting it happen. It's not about beating yourself up, it's about becoming conscious. Until you recognize the pattern, you'll keep living it. You'll think, I just attract the wrong people. But the truth might be, I haven't learned to identify the right ones because I've been repeating what's familiar instead of what's healthy. Sometimes the pattern is you trying to fix someone so you can feel needed. Sometimes it's you avoiding real vulnerability by always choosing people who won't open up. Sometimes it's about believing love has to be hard in order to be real. These are deep emotional scripts that run silently beneath the surface until you bring them to light. The real breakthrough comes when you stop trying to win someone over and start trying to understand yourself. Ask yourself, why am I drawn to this kind of person? What emotional need is being met here, even if the outcome is painful? Am I trying to heal something from the past by recreating it in the present? These questions take courage, but they give you clarity. Because once you name a pattern, you take away its power. It can't run your life without your permission anymore. And here's the beautiful part. Patterns can be broken. They're not permanent, they're learned. And anything learned can be unlearned. But you can't break a pattern by hoping someone else behaves differently. You break it by making different choices, by pausing where you used to rush, by walking away where you used to cling, by speaking your needs early instead of suppressing them and hoping they're magically met. You break the pattern by doing something new, even when it feels uncomfortable, especially when it feels uncomfortable, because growth rarely feels familiar, but that's exactly what makes it powerful. Sometimes the biggest act of healing is turning down the kind of love that once excited you, because now you see it for what it is: inconsistent, conditional, confusing. And instead, you hold space for something more stable, even if it feels boring at first. Because safe love often feels boring to someone used to chaos. But that boredom is actually peace. That silence is actually safety. That stillness is actually alignment. It's not always about the person. It's about the pattern. And once you see that, you stop needing closure from others. You start giving it to yourself. The next time something feels familiar in a relationship, pause. Ask yourself, is this familiarity a sign of connection, or is it a sign of repetition? That one moment of reflection can save you years of repeating what no longer serves you. Because when you break the pattern, you don't just change your relationships, you change your life. One of the most common traps in relationships is trying to fix the other person. You see their potential, you believe in who they could be, and you make it your mission, often silently, to pull that version of them forward. You invest your time, your patience, your heart, all in the hope that they'll grow into the partner you need. But here's the truth. Trying to fix someone is not love. It's management, and it's exhausting. You have to stop focusing on what they could become and start focusing on what you're choosing to tolerate, because lasting change doesn't come from getting better at managing someone else's behavior. It comes from raising your standards for what you allow in the first place. Standards are not demands. They're not ultimatums. They're not about being controlling. Standards are about clarity. They're the invisible line between what you welcome and what you walk away from. When you don't have clear standards, you find yourself constantly adjusting to someone else's mood, their inconsistency, or their lack of effort. And here's the dangerous part. It often happens so subtly that you don't even realize you're shrinking. One compromise here, one ignored red flag there, and before you know it, you're living in a version of a relationship that doesn't even feel like yours anymore. Feels like something you're maintaining out of habit or hope. But a relationship breakthrough happens the moment you realize this. It is not your job to fix someone so they can love you better. It is your job to love yourself enough to not stay where you're consistently unmet. There's a difference between supporting someone through growth and staying stuck in a loop of excuses and unmet promises. Growth requires ownership. And if they're not owning their behavior, if they're not showing the willingness to meet you halfway, not in words, but in consistent action, that's not growth, that's potential. And potential doesn't build healthy relationships. Standards do. Raising your standards means being clear on how you want to be treated. Not in theory, but in practice. It means saying no to bare minimum effort. It means understanding that if someone constantly makes you feel uncertain, anxious, or undervalued, that is information. And the way you respond to that information defines your self-respect. So many people stay in situations that don't serve them because they're afraid of being too much, afraid of being high maintenance, afraid of asking for more. But asking for basic respect, consistency, honesty, and effort is not too much. It's the baseline for a real, functioning relationship. The fear of losing someone often keeps us from raising the bar. But the truth is, the wrong person will leave whether your standards are low or high. The right person will rise to meet your standards because they want to be there. They want to show up. They're not threatened by your self-worth. They're drawn to it. The moment you start raising your standards is the moment you stop wasting time on people who need convincing. And that opens up space, emotional, mental, and spiritual space for the kind of connection that doesn't drain you, the kind that energizes you, the kind that feels like home, not hard labor. When you raise your standards, you're not being harsh, you're being honest with yourself and with others. You're saying, this is what a relationship means to me. This is the kind of partnership I want. And I won't settle for anything that consistently falls short of that. It takes courage. It takes a willingness to be alone for a while. It takes the discipline to not go back to what's familiar just because it's available. But on the other side of that is something stronger: peace, clarity, and connection that doesn't feel like a performance. How can I get them to change? Start asking, what does staying in this say about what I believe I deserve? And more importantly, what do I want to believe now? Because you're not here to mold people into who they could be. You're here to honor who you are and let your standards do the work of sorting who stays. That's not just self-respect, that's transformation. Emotional availability. It sounds like a complex concept, but in reality, it's one of the most fundamental building blocks of a healthy relationship, and yet it's often overlooked. We get distracted by attraction, chemistry, charm, shared interests, so many surface level connections, without asking the deeper question, is this person actually available to build something real with me? You can have incredible chemistry with someone who is completely unavailable emotionally. You can laugh together, talk for hours, even share a deep sense of comfort and still not be building anything meaningful. Because emotional availability isn't about how fun or passionate things feel in the moment. It's about presence, consistency, and willingness to engage in a deeper connection over time. The tricky part is that emotional unavailability isn't always obvious. It doesn't always show up as someone saying, "I'm not ready for a relationship." Sometimes it's far more subtle. It looks like someone who avoids serious conversations, someone who gets distant when things start to feel too intimate, someone who gives just enough to keep you hoping, but not enough to ever feel secure. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. They mistake intermittent attention for potential. They think, if I just stay patient, if I love them enough, if I keep showing up, eventually they'll open up. But emotional unavailability is not a phase that passes with more effort. It's a state of being. And unless that person has the willingness and the self-awareness to actively work on it, you could wait forever for a connection that never fully arrives. One of the biggest breakthroughs in any relationship journey is realizing this. You cannot connect deeply with someone who is emotionally unavailable, no matter how much you care about them and no matter how much potential you see. It's not about how much effort you're willing to give. It's about whether there's actually space in their life and heart for something real. Because you can't love someone into readiness. You can't fill the gaps they're not willing to acknowledge. And you can't keep sacrificing your emotional needs, hoping they'll eventually learn how to meet them. Emotional unavailability comes from fear. Fear of being hurt, fear of losing independence, fear of repeating past trauma. And that fear can create walls. Walls that keep people distant even when they say they want closeness. But no matter the reason behind the unavailability, the outcome is still the same. You feel alone in the relationship. You feel like you're the only one investing, the only one reaching, the only one holding it all together. That leads to resentment. Because deep down, you know love shouldn't feel one-sided. You know that someone who's emotionally present doesn't make you guess where you stand. They don't keep you in limbo. They show up consistently, not just when it's convenient, but when it matters most. It's important to understand that emotional availability isn't perfection. It doesn't mean someone never has bad days or moments of fear. It means they're willing to show up anyway, willing to have the hard conversations, willing to be seen not just when it's easy, but when it's vulnerable, willing to grow with you. You deserve a relationship where you're not constantly questioning whether your needs are too much. You deserve someone who doesn't make you feel needy for wanting clarity, affection, or reassurance. Those things are not weaknesses. They're signs of a healthy, connected bond. But to receive that kind of relationship, you have to recognize emotional availability as non-negotiable. Not a nice to have, not something to hope they'll develop. A requirement, a standard, a deal breaker. That kind of relationship doesn't feel like chasing. It feels like choosing. And it starts when you decide that emotional availability is not optional. It's essential. Grief, like you're letting go of not just a person, but the vision you built, the future you imagined, the version of you that existed in that dynamic. But here's what you need to know. The courage to walk away is not about giving up on love. It's about no longer abandoning yourself in the name of love. It's about honoring the voice inside that keeps whispering, "You deserve more than this." It's about respecting the parts of you that have been quietly suffering while the outside looked okay. It's about recognizing that peace is not a luxury. It's a basic emotional need. When you walk away from a relationship that isn't right for you, you're not just closing a chapter, you're reclaiming your energy. You're redirecting your love towards something better, something you might not even be able to see yet, but that can only arrive when you're finally willing to release what no longer aligns. This is where real growth lives, not in the staying that drains you, but in the leaving that frees you. But it doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes you cry the whole way through it. Sometimes you doubt yourself after. That's normal. But with time, you start to feel something shift, a lightness, a clarity, a deeper connection to yourself. Because every time you walk away from something that asks you to shrink, you expand, you grow, you evolve. You stop seeing walking away as the end of love and start seeing it as an act of love. It's not easy. It takes real bravery. But when you stop choosing comfort over truth, familiarity over fulfillment, and fear over freedom, you make space for something much more meaningful, not just with someone else, but within yourself. So if you find yourself at that breaking point where you know deep down that it's not working no matter how much you've tried, know this: you don't need more reasons to go. You need permission to honor what you already feel. That permission, it starts with you. Because sometimes the most important breakthrough isn't in what you fix, it's in what you finally let go. Every one of us is searching for connection, but the deeper truth is the kind of connection we create externally will always mirror the relationship we have with ourselves. That's what every real breakthrough in love begins with. Not with someone else changing, but with us waking up. Waking up to our patterns, waking up to our standards, waking up to the ways we've abandoned ourselves in pursuit of love that wasn't ready to meet us. This isn't about blaming others. It's not about closing our hearts or becoming guarded. It's about becoming conscious. Conscious of what we allow, what we repeat, and what we believe we're worthy of. Because when we see clearly, we choose differently. And different choices lead to different connections. Maybe the person doesn't change. Maybe the situation doesn't improve. But you evolve. You develop the strength to break the cycle, the wisdom to walk away when it's no longer right, the courage to raise your standards without apology, the clarity to recognize emotional unavailability not as a challenge to win, but as a red flag to honor, and the grace to understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both people is let go. A relationship breakthrough isn't always the beginning of something new with someone else. Sometimes it's the beginning of a new chapter with yourself.